Hi, everybody. Welcome to Conversations with Busy. I hope you enjoyed today's story. And if you do, please subscribe. Here we go. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Conversations with Busy. I am so excited that Arlina Allen is my guest on Conversations with Busy. Like, I'm already trying to get used to it, you guys. I'm already loving it. And if you guys have been listening for a long time, you will know that Arlina was on in October of 2020. Life has changed a lot in those 4 years, hasn't it, Arlina? Welcome back. I'm so glad you're here.
Thanks for having me. It's so good to see you and catch up.
I know, it's so fun. It's like, and how many years have you been sober now? Because I know you had substantially more than I did.
Well, last April, April 23rd was 30 years.
Right. See? And I'm 18. I'm chasing behind her. Never going to catch her.
You know what they say, don't drink and don't die. And then you'll be
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
It's so interesting because before we were recording everybody, Arlina was telling me a story about how people don't go to 12 step because you have to be really bad to go there.
I
Like your
literally
body.
had somebody I had literally had somebody tell me over the weekend that they had they were running into trouble with something. They didn't want to say what it was, and they had considered it, but they figured that they weren't that bad. They weren't bad enough to go to AA, so they didn't go and they didn't experience the steps. And I'm like, wow, that's a very common misconceptions, which is what the whole book is about, clearing up common misconceptions of a path to sobriety.
It's so interesting that you're bringing that up because it's a bottom, right? Because people just find if your bottom is really, really bad, like, I don't know, what is really, really bad? Is it like crash your car, going to jail, getting arrested?
Yeah. Yes, it is that for some people. But, I am sort of in the high bottom group where when I got sober, I still had a job. I was still making decent money. It was like I wasn't making great money, but my relationship was in shambles. But I had never gotten a DUI. So there was like a lot of yets for me. And so that I think I work with a lot of high achieving people and so they think I have a good career, I have a good relationship. They haven't lost anything. So they don't think that they're bad enough to go to a 12-step program. And I'm just saying the 12 steps are a worthy endeavor and you don't have to necessarily go to meetings. Meetings and the steps are two separate things. The program is actually the steps, but steps and meetings are like soap and water. They are better when you put them together.
Oh my gosh, for sure. And I mean, I always say my bottom hadn't gotten to places yet being the operative word for me. I mean,
Yeah.
I still had a house, I had a car, I had kids, but how I felt on the inside is my barometer, and
There it is.
not being able to feel like looking in the mirror and liking what's looking back at me. And I believe that the journey, it's been so interesting because there's so many new people that are like sober curious, air quotes, if you're listening to it, if you're not watching this on YouTube. I always go sober curious. I'm like, okay, sober curious, what is that? It sounds like something I would have loved to try. Let's be sober curious.
I feel like sober curious is a phase, right? Like I start the book out with my story. Like I had all these when I was writing the book, I had all these illusions of grandeur that I was going to write some great memoir, but alas, no. Yeah, but I do share my story, and it does kind of highlight what my sober curious journey was about, and ultimately it led me to a place where I recognize sober curious for me is about trying to moderate my drinking. And I just got to the place where I realized I'm not one of those people that can moderate their drinking. I had too much evidence to the contrary. So that's when I was like, okay, fine. Like 30 years ago, there was nothing else. There wasn't a bunch of online Instagram sober accounts. And I'm so glad I got sober a long time ago because I think I would have been tempted to try sort of like social media sobriety. But there was nothing else available. So I, submitted to, I had a friend that was like, just come with me, just come and see. And so I went and I immediately felt like I was at home. I was like, these people get my kind of crazy. They look like me. I went to meetings where there were a lot of professionals. And there was other people too, but even those people, they were like speaking my language. Like the circumstances were different, but the feelings were all the same. And they were talking about things that I thought I was alone in, and I wasn't. And I just was like immediately like relieved, like, oh, I found my people. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I totally can relate to what you're saying. I even think for one, I'm glad there was no social media when I was drinking because I definitely, oh my God, I got my
Oh,
own, I've got my own film crew following me around, watching me do my antics. It would have been like, hello, she's a total nightmare. And I'm so grateful that that did not occur.
yeah.
I am also and the social media with this, sober curious. I never really did that whole like I'm gonna try it and should I have one? Maybe I'll have
You didn't
two.
try to moderate?
I never tried to moderate. It was like, why the hell would I want to do that? I love to get drunk. Let's just face it. I have one, and I'm like, the problem was it wasn't the drinking, and I didn't learn that until I went into the 12 step rooms, but it was more of the fact that I was like the thinking, right? Because I would wake up the next day going, oh my God, why did I do that? The
Oh,
shame that I carried was so debilitating, Arlena. I was just like, oh my gosh, I can't feel like this anymore. I mean, I just would go over and over everything I had done. What did I say? And I didn't remember. Who did I hurt? I didn't remember. I go out to my car. Were all the mirrors on the car? Okay, good. Like it was just really, it was not like I just woke up one day and I literally went for a run on the beach. And the people who know me know I do not run unless someone's chasing me. And that's not very often. And so I went running for the beach and I was just like, God, please help me. I can't do this anymore. And I knew that the way that I felt on the inside was not normal.
yeah.
My other friends were not calling me going, "Oh my gosh, what did I do?"
Yeah. I had a very similar experience where I would wake up the next day and be like, what was that all about? Like I'd have like these episodes, I would call it. And it didn't happen every time, but every time it happened, I had been drinking, right? Where it was like my emotion management strategy was to suppress or deny, right? And then when you drink, it all explodes. For me, it was like a volcano. And I would just I joke around about my two alter egos that would appear when I was drinking. It was either Wimpy Wendy or Badass Betsy because I was either fighting or crying, sometimes both. And then later I realized, you know what? There's a third alter ego that shows up, Slutty Susan, and everybody loved her, like literally, right? It's like I was like, I wake up the next day and be like, oh my God, I am not living in alignment with my values, right? Like my mama did not raise me to be this crazy person, but I had no ability to control what happened to me once I started drinking. So, and I just got so tired of, I did that too, where I would have to call people and find out what happened the night before. I would occasionally go outside and look at my car. I remember this one morning, there were like I had this cute little truck and I had weeds stuck in between the hood and the fender and had a vague recollection of trying to get off the freeway. I was driving drunk and I tried to get off the freeway and I overshot and went into the weeds and
Oh,
somehow got home. And I think about those times like I could have killed somebody. I could have killed myself. I could have wrecked my car. None of those things didn't happen. I got pulled over 4 times while totally intoxicated, but I was dating a cop, a DUI cop. Imagine that. And I would hand over his business card with my driver's license and they would let me go. They would let me get back behind the wheel and drive home. How
and
crazy is that?
Insane. Well, of course, this was in the 80s. How old were you when you got sober?
I was 25 and I got sober in 94, but in 93 is when I had sort of like my bottom. I had gone out with my sister. We had this horrible night and I had lost my mind on the way home. That DUI cop that I had been dating, well, he was married and we broke up and I was dating his best friend. I was so messy. And on the way home, and I was supposed to meet this his best friend at the bar. He stood me up, and I was so hurt. But I was making out with some other guy at the bar. It was a mess. And on the way home, we passed the married cop doing a field sobriety test. And my sister was driving my car. She said, I lost my damn mind. I punched the windshield in a couple of places and broke it. She said I was trying to crash. She was driving my car. I was trying to crash my own car. I was trying to jump out. I don't know how she finally gets us close to home. And she gets out of the car while I'm losing my mind in the middle of the street and goes, apparently I kicked her in the face and gave her a bloody nose. She manages to pull the car over. She runs to the neighbor's house. My childhood best friend lived very close to we almost made it home. They came out, the police showed up, and I have a vague memory of they were twin girls. I don't know which one it was like, I just remember her going, it's not worth it. I think they were going to take me to jail. And she looked, and I guess I must have calmed down because I never went to jail. But I woke up the next morning. The guy was supposed to meet was in my bed. I was like, "How did you get here?" And he quickly disappears, and I have to call my sister who is living with my mom and go over to my mom's house to find out what happened. So humiliated that now my mom knows everything that's going on. Right? She's like very proper, and she did not raise me to act like this. And that I was like, this has to stop. And that's when I started to question my drinking, but I tried to moderate for 2 more years. It was a very painful 2-year process.
Crazy.
I know.
It is. It's crazy. Think about the insanity. And
Yeah.
what made you decide to share your story with the world and start One Day at a Time Recovery podcast?
Well, it was kind of funny. So this is my second podcast. So I was working in Silicon Valley as a tech executive, doing software sales. I was at this cool startup and I was following this guy who had a podcast. And I was like, it'd be I was in a male dominated industry. And I was like, it'd be interesting to have a woman's voice talk about, tech sales and start the startup world and stuff. But it was really on my heart to do a sobriety podcast, but I didn't know anybody else that was doing this. Is 2016. You and I started our podcast at the same time. But I was afraid of what my community would think because of the traditions. And I was confused about anonymity and secrecy. There's a difference. Like, sobriety doesn't need to be a secret, right? They just ask that you not claim affiliation to any specific organization. That's on AA.org. But what happened was I had a friend. So she and I used to go to a 6 a.m. meeting. It was called the ODAP meeting. And I went with her for years, but she had been struggling with insomnia and headaches and whatever. And I'm at work one morning. I didn't go to the meeting. She had gone to the meeting. And on her way to work, she got into a single car accident and died. And I was so devastated. She and I were about the same age. She just graduated college. She had totally turned her life around. And it felt like she was sort of at the beginning of her life, right? And I think about the dreams that died, the dreams that she had that died with her. And I was thinking about, what? Whose approval am I waiting for? Right? It felt like a dream given to me by God. Who was I to say no to that? It was like a calling that I just couldn't quiet. And so after Gina passed away, I was like, that's it. I'm not going to die with this dream on my heart. And that's when I started the podcast. And it's been a while. So it's been 8 years. It's been a wild ride. I'm sure you have a bunch of stories because you and I started around the same time. It's amazing the opportunities and the people that you get to meet when you do a podcast like this.
It's amazing. It's amazing. And then a thought that I've always had is writing a book. And how did that come to fruition? Because the last time I talked to you 4 years ago, I remember you were I think you were then starting to see is that when you were starting your groups? Was that like 4 years ago?
Yeah, yeah, about that. Yeah, I
Yeah, I
decided
remember
to
you
leave
talking
the
about
corporate
you,
world.
yeah, you were talking about your groups. And what else were you talking? I remember that you were going to start groups. So you were happy. Do you still have groups?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I teach a self-esteem class that has kind of evolved now. I'm relaunching it as a 4-month program called the Inner Compass program. And I can tell you a little bit more about that, but it's been an evolution. I mostly work one-on-one with people. But yeah, it's been an evolution, but the cornerstone of everything is about how do we help people end needless suffering, right? There's a lot of suffering. And, addiction is a crisis that needs to be resolved. But it gets resolved, right? And then everything else opens up. And so that's really where my focus is like, what happens afterwards? Like, how do we live sort of this limitless lifestyle and actually reach our dreams and sort of break out of those negative patterns that some of us in long term recovery get? So that's where my focus is now. And now with the book, it's like, you know what? You want to get sober? Go to 12 step. Here's a guide that will help you sort of get past some of the really common barriers that keep people out. And then once you got all that settled, then come back and we'll do the deep work and do some of the work around resolving internal resistance. That's the work that allows you to do all the other work. So I'm super excited about that.
And so I have a question for you. And this, I didn't warn you about this one, but so when they talked about coming to believe in a power greater than yourself in step two, and they said, you can make it a doorknob, you can make it a group of drunks. What are your thoughts on spirituality? God, I'm just going to come right out and say it. What are your thoughts
Yeah.
on, and is it a spiritual thing or is it really Jesus Christ? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's kind of interesting. So I grew up in the church. I was saved at a Billy Graham crusade when I was 14 years old. But yeah, isn't that cool?
Oh my
Yeah,
God, go back and tell us that story. Come on, tell us that story at 14 if you remember it. You
it
probably
was
weren't drinking.
amazing. Well, the funny thing is I had grown up in the church. So my parents always went to church. We went to church every Sunday. In high school, we went from a Presbyterian church to a Baptist church. And so I was super involved with like we were going, excuse me, we were going to church a lot. But I had a lot of childhood trauma and it was starting to show up when I was about 14 years old when I was going to this church. And I used to get high with the pastor's daughter all the time. She was the biggest stoner I had ever met. One time she told me that she was high so often that not being high was her altered reality. And I was like, I want to be exactly like you. That's,
And your
yeah,
mother, of course, had no idea.
what's that?
Your mother had no idea.
My mom?
Yeah.
Well, I had gone to live with my dad at that point. I had been going to church. I was living at my mom's house and I had been going to church, and she and I were in a rough patch. So if I can just back up for a second, there were a couple of things that happened to me when I was really young. I started being sexually molested by a neighbor when I was 5 years old. And I was going to church. And so I had this idea that I was supposed to be this good girl, but there was this other thing that was happening to me that made me feel like I was a bad person. Right. And I had been begging God my whole life to fix me. And then when I was 7 years old, my parents divorced. And through a lot of therapy and looking back, I realized that as a little girl, I thought it was my fault because I was bad. Right. And, church sort of reinforced this idea that there were these ideals I was supposed to strive for, but I was failing all the time. And somewhere along the line, I decided, and I just couldn't act right. And somewhere along the line, I decided that if I couldn't be good, I was going to be good at being bad. Right. And I was going to have some fun. I was going to earn my seat in hell. I was going to earn that seat. And there was a lot of things that didn't make sense to me. Like I knew my mother she wasn't super religious. And it didn't make sense to me. Like they kept telling me that my puny mind couldn't fathom the vastness of God's love. on the other hand, if she didn't believe in a very specific way, she was going to burn in hell forever. And I couldn't reconcile those two ideas. And I had been begging God to fix me my whole life. And here we are, still human. It was very disappointing. And I just couldn't act right. So I just gave up. And I was like, this isn't working for me. So I abandoned God. And fast forward to that period of that 2-year period where I was moderating, when I finally got beat down, do you know what my prayer was? God,
What?
please help me. God, please help me. And so when I went to, there was nothing else available but 12 step. And I was like, and I saw the word God, and I was like, if this is what it is, I'm not going to be able to do it. And this very kind woman pulled me aside and she, like, hands me a piece of paper. She goes, okay, on one side, write down all the positive attributes of God. And then just for funsies, like she's like, you don't even have to believe this, just for funsies, write down all the positive things. On the other side, write down all the negative things that you don't want it to be. So I did it, handed her my sheet of paper, and she tore it down the center. And she handed me the good side. And she's like, okay, we're going to start with this. And I was like, that's it. She's all, that's it. And that's how I started my path back to God.
Oh,
That's how I started my path back to God. And I got to tell you, today, one of my favorite daily readers is Jesus Calling.
yeah.
Do you have that one?
Of course. Of course. Of
Oh
course.
my God.
Got
It
a
seems,
couple copies.
yeah, it seems like whenever my heart is hurting the most, that is the book that I turn to. And it is like salve on a wound. It heals my heart every time. And there's a couple of things I bristle at, but it doesn't matter. One of the things that I really appreciate about my religious training was they would say, we'd read the Bible, right? And it's written in this old timey language. And you sort of have to translate, like, how does it apply to my daily life today? Right. And so when I got sober and they hand me this book called Alcoholics Anonymous, they call it the big book. I'm reading this old timey language. And in my mind, I'm translating to what it means for me today.
Yeah.
Right. That was such a gift. That was such a gift that I had this training. And even though I was like, I was lost, I was like, I can't do this thing. I found a way back. And I found a way back that made, like, it needed to make sense to me. And so I have come to understand there was like a lot of things like had a hard time having faith, but when I didn't have faith, I had evidence. I had experiences because I have had so many experiences since I got sober that there is a loving power that is for me, that's on my side, that will help me. I have so much evidence now that when I have those moments of doubt, I can look at the evidence because I've just am so ingrained that I'm on my own. Nobody's coming to help me. I kind of grew up with this idea that God's not going to do for you, you can do for yourself. And the message I got was, it's all on me. And because I wasn't the person I wanted to be, felt like God failed me. That's the honest truth. Is I felt like whatever my way was, it wasn't working. So I just needed to find something that made sense. But after 30 years of sobriety, it's like I have a lot of evidence. And when I have those moments of doubt, I can go back to what I know for sure.
Which is Jesus. It's like so interesting. It's so interesting because I feel like to get, at least for me, and this is all my own opinion, I think to have true long-term sobriety, you have to have that relationship. Because if we rely on other human beings are fallible, right? Everybody. At the president of the United States, your doctor, your lawyer, your next door neighbor, your priest, like everybody that is walking on this planet is fallible. But if
Human.
you, yeah, human. And if you believe in something larger than yourself, you can have this life that's beyond your wildest dreams.
Yeah, and what I know for sure, so I'm 350 interviews in. I'm sure you have probably more than that because you publish more than I do. But I have met people who claim to be atheists who rely on the principles who are also sober. So I don't think that you have to have that, but almost in practice you kind of do,
Well,
right?
and I believe that people that are happier have a relationship with God. I've noticed that in my on my journey, and that's my judgment, and I'm allowed to have it, right? And so,
Yeah, no, we're talking about opinions, right? And opinions aren't necessarily rooted in fact. I have my opinions that are not necessarily rooted in, and statistics are a funny thing because if it happens to you, it's 100%, right? So, and, we're not running scientific studies where we take, 1,000 people and run them through experiments to come up with empirical data. We're not talking about empirical data. We're just talking about subjective experiences. And what I know subjectively is that I've interviewed lots of people who get sober in a variety of different ways. And I would just say that all paths are valid. If it helps you to get sober, if you find God in nature, if that's your spirituality, that's okay too. Which
but
probably
I think
doesn't.
and you get to, and it's interesting. I just did a course called Alpha, that it was started in Europe and actually in England by a gentleman who wasn't a big time attorney there. And he was never going to become Christian, never, ever, ever going to become Christian because they were boring. To be Christian, it's boring. And to read the Bible is boring. And it's interesting as time went on, he did enough studying over there with people and all over the world. And this course Alpha is, if you're out there and you're thinking about doing it, I swear it will change your life. It's unbelievable. But they talk about how having a relationship with God, like Christians seem happier and more, I don't know. It's kind of
Yeah, I
interesting.
think it just depends on who you talk to, right?
Yeah. But it's
Yeah.
interesting. I just think from my journey of sobriety, I don't know if you found this too, but like on my journey, it's been just taking that first step and going, I want help, has given me an opportunity to open doors that for so long would have been like, I'm not going there. But now I'm like, okay, I'm not that scared. I've already been to hell in terms of being like literally in my alcoholism. I feel like I was living in
Suffering.
pure hell, that today I can just go open doors, open doors, open doors. And it's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say what I learned in sobriety is and I read about in the book about recovery resistance, and it's really focused on this idea that we all have limiting beliefs. And what I now know that a limiting belief kind of is comprised of two things. It's either incomplete information or incorrect information. So, if you find, and we all think that we'd like to think of ourselves as being open minded, but if you find resistance to recovery, if you find resistance to religion, it's because you have a limiting belief in some way. And so, what I loved about the 12-step process, it was a way of deconstructing my beliefs so that I could get to the root cause issue and gather more information or correct my presupposition. Because what I see, and I'm sure you do too, even people, especially in long term sobriety, we fall for something called the, cybernetic loop. It's like in behavioral psychology, they call it the cybernetic loop, where a feeling arises and we have a thought. We make a decision, we take action, and then we invoke the law of cause and effect. And then we have an experience that confirms our presupposition. So that's a confirmation bias loop. And so it's if you find yourself arriving at the same place over and over again, you have a limiting belief. So you either there is a flaw in the belief, the presupposition, or you're missing some information because with more information, we make different decisions, right? And then once we have more information, we make different decisions. We again invoke the law of cause and effect, but because the cause changed, so is the effect, and have different experiences.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
Do you ever get to a place that you're just like so tired of like figuring out like who you are? Or do you ever get to that place where you're like, oh my gosh, I just am so bored of myself and what my thinking is. And I'm just like, I'm done. I just want to relax and sit on the beach and drink a mocktail or whatever it is and just go, okay, I've done enough of like thinking about myself and me and how I can be better.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that it's part of human nature. I feel like this is part of God's will that we continue to grow and evolve, right? So when there are times when I feel that fatigue, which is very valid, right? Sometimes we just go over the same information so many times. It feels rote, it doesn't feel inspiring. And that typically for me is a sign that I might need some rest. Maybe I need to take a break. Maybe I need to travel. Maybe I need to do something else. And in 12 step, we're conditioned to help others, like be of service to get out of ourselves. Like those are all things that are really important for maintaining balance. But I really feel like creativity is part of the creator's will for us, right? The creation is not separate from the creator, right? And the creator is creative and God expresses himself through us. Again, this is like an opinion, right? But it just feels natural to my system. And it's something, a lot of people get confused about what is God's will for me. Well, for me, like I have this internal compass, right? When I tune in to my heart, this is where God lives in my life, is in my heart. And I know at a gut check level whether I'm on the right path or not. God leads me through joy, right? When I'm in a lot of pain, a lot of times it's like I'm trying to, push the boulder up the hill. Like this isn't my path. This isn't what meant. This is not what's meant for me, right? Rejection is God's protection, and so there's a fair amount of like turning, asking God for guidance. I pray for gentle lessons these days, but just I pray just make it obvious because I get confused about what's God's will, what's my will, what do you want for me? Sometimes I forget that God is willing to help me. So I always have to return back to, like, if I am feeling those feelings, like I'm so sick of myself, you know, to come back to my heart center where God lives and offer myself empathy and compassion and express God's love through joy, finding those ways. I think that's a pretty natural experience though, to just feel so sick of
I
yourself
I
once in a while.
I do, and I before we recorded, since the last time I saw you, your mom passed away, and you mentioned that during that time you gave yourself the permission to say, I'm in too much pain to do anything. I'm just going to sit here and I'm going. And I think so many people think that they're supposed to get up and keep going. And, and when things get really tough, and you love yourself enough that you were able to say, you know what, I got to stop for a minute.
Yeah. It really didn't feel like I had a choice, to be perfectly honest. Like it was just, I lost all my ambition. I didn't realize how desperately I had wanted my mother's approval. And it was so ingrained in me as a little girl to seek my mom's approval. I mentioned that I had been sexually abused when I was young. My mom actually happened to walk in on it one time, and her reaction was to get angry, and she lost her ever loving mind. And I don't remember exactly what happened, but I remember that she was angry and I felt so ashamed. I kind of felt like my mom hated me. I knew she didn't hate me, but that was a life altering experience for me because I thought it was my fault. I thought everything was my fault. I didn't know that at that young age, at 5 years old, you really don't have the capacity to take responsibility. I didn't know what was happening, to be honest. And and then something happened after, like when I was 14 years old, my sister had mental illness, and my mom was a very strong woman. She was no nonsense. She really didn't do a lot of feelings other than happy, but she had sort of a rage problem when I was young. But one day she came to me and she was so vulnerable because she was so afraid for my older sister. And she was like, we have to stay close to her. Like she was vulnerable. I'd never seen her this way before. And she was asking me for my help. And somehow it clicked in my brain, if I can save my sister, then she will love me. And then, fast forward to today, it's like my whole life is dedicated to trying to help other people because it was so ingrained in my psyche to get my mom's love, but it was a setup for failure because at 14 years old, I didn't have any kind of skills. It was never appropriate for me to try to save her, but that's what I got in my head. Right. So again, it was like failure after failure over such a prolonged, I just hated who I was. And I think that was at the root of my needing to drink and do drugs and other things because I often say that, that actually saved me. Like drugs and alcohol saved me. If I had to feel all my feelings, I don't think I would have survived. right? But it was a coping skill that lost it stopped being helpful, and it like this my savior became my executioner, right? Like it was going to kill me with all this drunk driving, all the craziness that I was doing. It was going to kill me. But it was just, man, it was such a wild ride. So anyway, I forgot how I got on that tangent, but yeah, losing my mom, I didn't realize that my whole life was set up to impress her. And when she died, it took all my ambition and I just couldn't care anymore. I was so lost. For it took me about a year and a half to start feeling like myself again and starting to feel like I wanted to get back to who I was, different, but come back to the creative person, the person who wanted to help, who wanted to, participate in life again. It took me a long time. It was really hard.
I'm so sorry. And did you graduate high school in 19? What year did you graduate high school? 87?
87, yeah.
You're the same class as I am. And
So,
I don't know if parents during that era, because it's something so interesting, because I think that the group, like, again, the people that we all went to school with, our moms were like, I don't know. It was just like, and it wasn't a lot of love, and it wasn't a lot of like, oh, let me sit down. My mom was like, I'm like, I got my period. She's like, here's a book called Period. Go sit there and read it. And you were like, okay, really, this is it? Okay, this is a total life changing thing, and I'll read a book. But God, my mother passed away as well, and just having that sense of like, our moms were just definitely not what they're like today, or like probably you and I were to our children. Like, are you okay? Are you okay? Like my mom was like, you mentioned like you can't have feelings, and that was so hard. And I didn't have the sexual abuse that you went through, and I'm so 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 sorry. But it is so hard when you don't feel like that unconditional love in your home,
yeah.
and you go and you search from your friend. You're like, you're looking to you learn, at least for me, I learned how to grow up from my friends. Like my
Yeah.
friends said, do this and do that. It wasn't like my mom ever really even cared. It was like, go play in traffic, literally. That's what they said to us. Right?
Wow. Yeah. Did your parents stay married?
No.
Yeah. So I feel like as a grown woman with two kids, I look back and I go, "Oh, she was tired. She was working hard." Like my dad was a good dad. He paid his child support. He he participated in my life. But that woman was tired. She was working a full-time job, probably for not enough money. She was raising two kids. She's an immigrant from Mexico City. She was like the first foreign exchange student for Klamath Falls, Oregon when she was 14. Her parents like pushed her out of the nest when she was, yeah, you should go to a foreign country, didn't speak the language. Like she learned to be high. And then when she passed away, she was like a multimillionaire. She spent her career in tech. She was amazing. She was like the most positive person that you would ever met, but she was hardcore when we were growing up, when I needed her to be soft and they say, I wonder if you experienced this. They say that overprotective mothers were underprotected daughters.
I
So
think that makes
I
sense.
was such a I was, every little
Oh,
thing my kid went through, I was like, I remember when I brought the baby home, my first baby, she came to stay with me and he had been in his crib and he started to cry and he immediately went to go get him. She goes, "Oh, honey, let him work it out." And I looked at her like, "Are you high? Work it out? What do you mean? Like, what are you talking about? He's a baby." And then it dawned on me, oh, that's how she raised me, with this idea nobody is coming. You need to figure it out on your own. And figure it out is not a slogan for a reason. Like we need each other. But I grew up, and this is why a lot of us isolate when we're stressed out, is because that's how we were taught to. When I was growing up, when I was stressed out, I was isolated. It was like, go to your room and have those feelings over there. Like she couldn't be bothered. She couldn't cope.
oh
And
my gosh.
so,
Well,
yeah.
did you
So
have
I was,
did you have ADHD too? Because I had
yeah, I did.
I mean, that's me.
You know what my nickname was?
What?
Scatterbrain. They said I was. They called me either Pigpen or Scatterbrain. Like that'll do a lot for your self esteem growing up as a girl. I was a tomboy. I was always anyway. Yeah. So lot of self-image issues. We'll say. A lot of, yeah, scatterbrain. That was fun.
It was so I felt so much shame
Yeah.
as a child. So
Yeah.
much shame because I was never good enough. I did bad, I was drunk. I got myself into situations that most people would like never want to get into, and I
How old
horrible.
were you when you started drinking?
I was 13.
Yeah. 13, 14 is that magical age. Yeah.
Yeah, so it was and bad, did like lots of stuff that was hard, and I always had so much shame, and I didn't want to be like that. And both my grandmothers were alcoholic,
Mm.
you know, and when
Mm.
both your grandmothers are alcoholic, it's just so interesting, like genetically. And you think about like your grandparents, then your grandparents thought that they were doing the best for your mom, like, oh my
Yeah.
gosh, she's gonna have this life and then America, and she gets to go do these amazing things. And I think because our grandparents had gone through, World War II, a lot of really hard things. And
Yeah.
then we wanted to give our moms like this life that was, but they
Yeah.
didn't give them a roadmap either. And
Mm.
then they have
Yeah.
kids. And it's just so interesting how everything evolves and how today it's okay to talk about all these things because it helps others.
Thank God. Thank God. Thank God we can talk about these things. And it's so interesting. You kind of shed a light on sort of intergenerational trauma. My grandmother, who's still alive at 96 and a half.
God bless her.
I know she's in Mexico City with my auntie Arlina, and she was one of 10. And she was married off when she was 14 to a man that was 27. And back in the day, that was okay. I know, like today, we would be like, oh my God, he's a child molester.
Right.
But that's how it was back then. This is 96 years ago, I don't know, whatever, a long time ago. And then my grandfather had an illegitimate child with another woman. And so my grandmother was tasked with, at 14, of raising this other child. And then she had 5 of her own. And with no skills, no money, and my grandfather was a great guy, God bless him, but he wasn't like a provider. He wasn't a great provider. And his mother was wealthy, so they lived in the bougie part of town. And my grandmother had to live with her mother-in-law, who was very cruel. And so this poor woman was raising all these kids, no authority, no money, and she was angry. And so when she was raising my mom, she didn't have time for her feelings, right? So my mom wasn't really independent, and that's how she raised me. And she used to tell me all the time, she was so proud that she raised me and my sister to be independent. I was like, you know what? I was too young to have that much responsibility. You weren't doing me a favor, right? That was hard. It was hard to have to do everything on my own so young. I wasn't equipped. It's like our moms were not like, they weren't paying attention. They weren't supportive. They weren't noticing when we were suffering. I went through a period when I was really young. My mom was divorcing her second husband, and I was so stressed out. All my hair started falling out, like in gobs, like a fistful, and it got really scary. And when it stopped, one day she scooped me up in her arms and she let me have a good cry. Like I cried my little eyes out, and my hair stopped falling out after that. And she looked back and she goes, oh, you were stressed out. There's typically one person that does all the feelings in the family, and that was me. Right. And my stress manifested in hair loss at 10 or 12, something like that.
It's so crazy, but it's like I in the bottom of my soul, I know that our moms did not wake up and go, "I'm gonna really fuck up my kids." That's what I'm gonna do.
No,
I think that they did
no.
the best that they could do, and
Yeah.
learning that I don't know. There's a part inside of me that's just kind of like we've got to just be a little bit kinder to
Yeah.
like because I have kids now that I mean, my oldest son stopped talking to me. He met somebody. That's this new thing. Kids are becoming estranged from their parents. It's like huge. I've had guests on, I've had specialists on, da, 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 but it's this new phenomenon. And us moms are like, what did we do? I mean, if I didn't do a quarter of what my mom did to me, and
Seriously.
right, and so it's just it, we're it's. it's like learning that we are all human. There's a part, there's this thing like being kind to one another. Forgiveness is like this huge thing that we have missed in life. And I think in the 12 steps, they do it so brilliantly with steps 8 and 9, and literally, 7, 8, and 9, writing it down, and who is this person that you're resentful for and why, and how can you own it? And you don't do it for the other person. It's mostly for you so that you can be free and not have this resentment, which then keeps rearing its ugly head, right? Which it does for,
Mhm.
and they go back and they get that drink. And I think that that key of the shame and getting to the place that it's like, no shit. God took away the shame when he died on the cross. He said, I'm taking this with me. And forgive your neighbor. Like, forgive. Nobody is perfect, everybody. Like your mom, my mom did I mean, and for me, I found that it was easier once she died for me to have this total sense of like, oh my gosh, it's all
Yeah.
okay. She did the best.
Yeah, I think there's I feel a lot of, I don't like to speak ill of my mother, right? And so but I still need to honor my feelings. So there is a fine balance between just stating the facts and just recognizing how I was affected, how I interpreted the things that happened. It was my like I own my interpretation of my experiences with my mom. And there was something about her dying, something he said kind of triggered this idea because my mom could never really hold space for my painful feelings, right? She couldn't do it. She just couldn't do it.
Mhm.
And I stopped trying. Like I just accepted her, and she and I had a beautiful relationship at the end. We really did. I love my mother. There was always this little guard in my heart because I wanted her. I really wanted her to hold my pain. I wanted her to just witness and be present and not try to change my feelings. And she couldn't do it. And so when she died, all of a sudden, all I could see was how amazing she was. Like I had held on, like I didn't want to hold resentment. It was just there. It was a wish that I just couldn't let go. And when she died, it freed me of that. And then I was like, I do have regret that I couldn't, I tried, I really tried to let go and I just couldn't. And I have grace for myself because I couldn't. But it was interesting when she died and I realized suddenly all I could see was the good things about her. I sort of s- spun that around and looked at myself, all the resentment that I hold towards myself for not being perfect. It's like, it's almost as if this is kind of sound like a weird idea, but it's like I don't want to wait till I die and my spirit goes to heaven and I look back and I go, "Oh, I was lovable all along. I was just holding on to this idea of what I was supposed to be, and I was mistaken." Talk about misinformation. I was mistaken. I was always lovable. I was just human, that's all. Right? I was always lovable. And that was the whole message of Jesus that I missed when I was growing up. I love me some Jesus. A lot of times it's the people I don't like. The people that love Jesus I don't like because there's some I'm sure you know some people, like not all Christians. There are some like just like all sober people aren't the same. Not all Christians are the same. And I was not around people who embodied the spirit of forgiveness and kindness and compassion. I wasn't around those people, right? I wish I would have been because that was the message. That was the whole point of forgiveness. That I what it was to say I am lovable. I am God's grace can't be earned. It's given. And I missed it. I'm holding judgments towards myself. Right. And so it was interesting having that experience of losing my mom and then suddenly feeling nothing but love for her. I couldn't see anything but all the good about her. And it was so interesting. I just had a flash of what if I could apply that to myself and just let myself off the hook and forgive myself for all my guilt and shame, for my humanness, that 14-year-old girl that abandoned God. I abandoned God because I thought I was supposed to be perfect. I was judging me. God wasn't judging me. I was judging me. Largely because a lot of people around me were telling me I was bad. I had some errors that needed correction. I get that. But, all that to say that here we are. We're in a good place. We understand what God's love is really about today, right? And we can honor kindness and compassion in this politically charged climate, it always comes back to kindness. It's like, how are we going to treat each other, even if we don't agree?
I feel like ever since that Tuesday, I'm like, oh my God. Well, I was up till Wednesday actually because I stayed up till 4:30 in the morning. I feel like there's definitely, I don't know. I'm in Florida. You're out in, you're in,
I'm
re,
in Idaho, which is very red.
okay. So
All my
I just,
neighbors have Trump flags.
me too. I have flags in the whole nine yards. But I just feel like the whole world, I don't know if I'm delusional or not, but I feel like there's just this sense of like, okay, it's over. Thank God. We're just going to move forward in our lives. And I think that that has given me personally such freedom to be like, oh my gosh, I don't have to worry about it. It's over. Let's go on to the next thing. And with that being said, I could relate to everything you said. Again, we're the same exact age, that feeling of our mom and that feeling of like we're not doing what we're supposed to be doing because there's like this, I don't know, boardroom in the sky with these guys sitting there and they've got this plan and they're going, she did well at this check. She did well at that check. And it's like, Alyssa, stop. Okay. Getting to
Yeah.
this place of like, I'm just doing the best I can do. And I think that when we're sober, at least we get that chance to be able to say, I'm at least getting up in the morning, trying. I'm not hungover and I'm not in prison anymore of that desire to become not and have no feelings. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm, this is Christmas time. Here we go. Here
Here
we
we
go.
go.
So
Love Christmas. Can't wait. My lights are already up because I'm in a place that snows. So you have to get your lights up by like October.
really?
Yeah, you get your lights up real early because snow can happen at any minute. Like it's a light snow. Like I'm in a valley, so we don't get like feet of snow or anything like that, but it gets freaking cold. So you put your lights up early because you don't want to be on the roof if it's all slippery and stuff. So my lights are up. I'm just waiting. My husband is like, you can't pull out the tree until the day after Thanksgiving. But girl, let me tell you, the second dinner is over.
Cannot wait. I cannot wait. I cannot wait. I'm so excited. I've already said to my husband, okay, move this table, we're gonna put the tree here, and I want to do this here. And so if somebody's out there, and they're newly sober or they're newly sober curious, okay, and they want like, how am I gonna do this holiday season? And especially with the politics, even though it's over. I mean, all these social media, well, not even social media, all these shows like The View and people like Whoopi Goldberg are going, now, if your family member voted for Trump, do not have them for your house. Or if your family member voted for Kamala, don't have them to your house if you're a Trumper. And I don't think that's the answer. Do you?
So that is a fear-based response. So I do have compassion for a fear-based response, but it is not productive. Like the only there is this book called A Course in Miracles, and they love Jesus too.
Love it.
And at the end of the day, there is love or fear, and fear is not sustainable. Like you can use fear to some extent to fuel you, but it's a dirty fuel source because what ends up happening if you use fear to motivate you to take action, then you take action and then the pain starts to get relieved. The fear starts to subside and then your motivation is gone, right? But if you are operating from a source of love, that source of love is a well that never runs dry, right? That is the creative source. That goes back to the heart place, right? That goes back to what is the highest and greatest good for all involved. There is a proper use for fear, but I have a tendency to just want to give that part to God because I don't have the whole picture, right? And that helps me to relax. I almost felt like the whole 12-step process, if it could be reduced down to one word, it would just be relax, right? Because when we are relaxed, we're trusting, we can connect with, parts of our brain that are creative. When you're in fear, your amygdala gets activated and your vagus nerve gets triggered, and you are literally unable to access the creative part of your brain. It's a neurological mechanism, right? So it's not productive to come from a place of fear. It's not. Now, like, listen, if you're not a fan of Trump and you're afraid, maybe you can use some of that fear temporarily. But if you're not rooted in a place of creative love, like I feel like we're creative. Like we are built to create and flourish and nurture and love and allow things. We're very creative that way. And so I would encourage women in an empowering way to take full responsibility for your feelings, right? Empower yourself, make your money, lose the weight, declutter toxic people from your life, and not in a cut them out kind of way. I'm not talking about that. Like I don't like I have a sister that I'm no contact with. That's a whole nother thing. That wasn't about politics.
We
But
talk about that for hours, honey.
oh my goodness. Yeah, it was our relationship wasn't good for either one of us. I told my mom I tried, but anyway, I have people that check in on her, but it's just not good for either one of us. But yeah, it's, I feel like at some point, I feel like social media has just poisoned our society. It has learned that sex doesn't sell anymore. Self-righteous anger does, right? And that's what social media has done. It has polarized us. And we've lost sight that even in bad people, there's a little bit of good. And even in good people, there's a little bit of bad, right? And so it's up to us to decide. When I love somebody, my family members, whatever, I know they're not perfect. I love them anyway, right? I know I'm not perfect. I love me anyway, right? And
Well,
and I yeah, and I'm kind of in the middle, right? Like I was telling you before we hit record, it's like I couldn't in good conscience vote for either one of these crazy bastards. Our political system has been poisoned. We have totally lost sight of kindness and compassion and the extremists, right? Like those are the people that I often find are like irrational. And irrational just meaning they're in fear. They're making decisions from a fear-based place, not a place of love and compassion, right? And so it's our job to stay in the present moment, follow the internal compass, and everyone needs to do what they feel is right. I don't feel like cutting people out is necessary. I don't think that's the answer.
no, but it sometimes happens, unfortunately. And I know for me, when I first got sober, I'm going to end this soon because I've had you for almost an hour. I'm like,
I know,
thinking,
I got another one.
I know you've got, so I just want to end with this. Like, when I was first getting sober and I went to a therapist, I don't know if you did this, but I went to,
Oh, yeah.
I'm the oldest. I've got
I
two
did
sisters.
all the things.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I have two sisters and two brothers, and drinking is big in my family. It just is. It's like my mother was like, "Oh, you want that kind of wine? We'll get you a case of it, Elizabeth. Like my own case of Beaujolais Village George de Buff that she would buy me."
Oh,
And
y'all are bougie.
yeah, bougie. And so it was all about, like, what's your drink? And we got to have enough of it. And when I said, "Okay, I'm done. I'm quitting," my mom was like, "Well, only selfish people get sober." And I was like, "Well, I got to do
Um,
it." So I went to a therapist and I said, "What am I going to do?" Because I had three young kids. And she said, "Well, Elizabeth, you have no other option but to divorce your family." And that, my friend, was hard in the very beginning. It's like really, I think and I'm going to get your thoughts on this and we'll end this up. But, you know, if you're getting sober is a big change from what you used to be doing.
yeah.
And if you're around people that still partake and make you, no one can make you feel uncomfortable, but you would feel uncomfortable newly sober going to an event. It's hard. It is hard. The family is a hard unit and it's hard during the holidays. And we are right here in the middle of it about, 24 days from Christmas and everything. And it's like, what? It's hard. And if I were to say anything, I think you've got to be kind to yourself.
Yeah. To thine own self be true, right? Maybe temporarily, early sobriety is hard for a multitude of reasons. But when you're newly sober, your job is to take care of yourself, and everybody needs to take care of their selves. And I found that if you can be honest and just stick to I statements, like I feel uncomfortable being around people that are drinking, and just like let it hang like a lead balloon. And if they don't want you, like people tend to sort themselves out. It's either they come in, they rush in to support you, or they disappear. And both things are good because if you can't support me, then you probably shouldn't be around me for a little while. It doesn't mean that I cut you out of my life altogether, but for a little while, I just And I need to be honest with myself. I have needs, and if I'm saying I don't feel comfortable, then I need to put myself in a place where I do feel safe. It's not even just comfortable. It's like I need to be safe because for me to drink and start that rat race all over again, it could be deadly for me
Yeah,
because my drinking was that severe.
that's crazy. It has been such a pleasure having you on. Now, if you guys are out here and you love what Arlena said, you can buy her book. Where can we find your book? I'm going to have the link in my description on, so people can click it and go right to Amazon. What is the
Yeah,
name of
that's
it?
the easiest place to get it. I'm in the process of getting it, in Barnes and Noble and Target and all that stuff. But right now it's Amazon.
And what's the title?
It's the 12-step guide for skeptics. I love me the skeptics because I was a skeptic, but it's clearing up common misconceptions to a path of sobriety. So it's a take what you like, leave the rest. It has my experience, it has the exact homework I did to do the steps. And so all the homework is in there. There's how I did it, how I got past things like God, alcoholic, powerless, all the things. So yeah.
It's amazing. So if you guys are out there and you're like thinking if this is for a loved one, I don't know, maybe stick it in somebody's stocking for Christmas or something. Or for Hanukkah, it's one of your presents for Hanukkah. But
Right.
it's been such a pleasure. It's so great. We can't wait 4 years again to have you on. It was so nice having you
Well, I'm
on,
going to have you
Marty.
on my podcast pretty soon too. So we'll get a chance to catch up some more. I have so many questions for you. So we're going to do this all again, but you're going to be on the hot seat next time.
Okay, great. Well, it'll be fun. Thank you again for coming on, and Merry Christmas to you and Happy New Year.
Christmas. Happy New Year.
And I'll see you soon. Okay, everybody. Thanks for tuning into Conversations with Busy. And if you like what you heard, please subscribe to my channel. And my newsletter comes out. Go to my website and go to elizabethchance.com and you'll get my newsletter right into your inbox every Friday. And until next time, everybody, take care. Stay well. Sending hugs. Bye. Thanks for listening to Conversations with Busy. I hope you enjoyed today's show. If you did, if you could subscribe, that would mean the world to me. And follow me on all social media. And you can also get my newsletter every Friday morning into your inbox. Just go to elizabethchance.com and subscribe. Take care.